Welcome to the Museum of Everything podcast. We're Dan and Josh, curators of the Museum of Everything, here to discuss art, culture, history, and James Bond films this time. But before we get into James Bond, and we're now at our top 10 greatest James Bond films of all time, we're going to begin, as usual, with a little Museum of Everything pub trivia. And so, Josh, do you have a first question to me?
Yes. Operation Tidal Wave during the Second World War targeted oil refineries around a Romanian city. Name that city.
That would be Ploiești, I believe, spelled Ploiești.
Yep. I think it's pronounced Ploiești too, but...
well, worth looking into, but this oil field, famous oil production fields were also the target of a famous raid by the American Army Air Forces, which resulted accidentally because the plan of attack was confusing in B-24s attacking from two directions simultaneously and passing by each other in the skies just a few hundred feet off the ground. Tremendous confusion, and the Germans thought it was some new aerial tactic. It was an extremely dangerous raid. It was one of the most heavily defended areas in the world, and the casualties were tremendous. And we actually needed several more raids to, and never did succeed in completely knocking out the Ploiești oil fields. So, Ploiești.
True, but the Germans suffered very heavily from a lack of oil as the war went on, and this was largely, or at least substantially, responsible for that.
That is true as well. And so they made all sorts of scientific progress in artificial alternatives to gasoline because that was always one of their most lacking resources. And in fact,
and they also made a lot of progress in artificial rubber made out of petroleum because they didn't have any rubber sources.
I had just been reading in Shire's book, End of a Berlin Diary, his sequel to the original Berlin Diary, which is one of the, I think, the very greatest and most important books of the 20th century.
The Berlin Diary rather than...
Yes, Berlin Diary. But in his sequel where he discusses the aftermath of the war and now Hitler's last days, gasoline was so rare that they had trouble coming up with enough to burn Hitler's body. There was a requisition for 200 liters of fuel to burn Hitler and Eva Hitler as she became in her last night. And they could only come up with 160 or 180 liters or something like that, even though it was for the very important task of burning Hitler. In any event, I think I get the first question right then.
Good work.
My first question to you is... at the 1939 World's Fair, the Westinghouse Pavilion famously displayed a robot which could actually respond to voice commands, a big gold chap. And what was the name of the robot?
Oh, man. I remember exactly what he looks like. What was his name? It wasn't Cerebro. It was something like that.
You are really on the right track.
Yeah, it was...
You really have the right idea. I think you may be so close that it's preventing you from remembering. I will tell you that he had a pet dog who was named Sparko.
This is driving me crazy. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's on the tip of my brain, but I can't get there. Tell me.
The name of the robot was Electro.
Electro.
I know you were really very close. I'm almost tempted to give it to you.
No.
They filmed this in color in a little documentary. Actually, it wasn't quite a documentary because it was a little fictional film about a family visiting the World's Fair. And so you can see Electro performing some of his tricks. He was a huge sensation, and the way they made him work, it wasn't purely trickery. It was actually more related to what artificial intelligence would become. Essentially, he had kind of a telephone switchboard in him. And the way telephone switchboard works is it responds to a certain number of clicks in a series of sequences and knows where to direct the call, essentially a formula, like 3 clicks and 7 clicks and 9 clicks, essentially.
By the way, if you want to see a telephone switchboard doing exactly that, go back and watch our Instagram reel where Dan talks about Dial M for Murder, which includes Hitchcock's filming of exactly that process.
That's exactly what's going on. And so here, the robot obviously couldn't understand actual vocal commands. What he was responding to was a series of commands that had a certain number of words in it in a certain order. And that was essentially like dialing a phone number. So, will you count them for me, please? Was essentially like dialing, will you, to count them for me, for please, 1. And so dialing that number 241 told Electro to begin a program where he would count on the fingers of his hands, for example. And so that way, by using like essentially a series of short phone numbers that were triggered not by running your finger around on a rotary dial, but by speaking, delivering a series of little clicks, essentially, Electro would know which program to run. It was really extremely clever, and people loved it at the fair.
Very, very far ahead of its time. But so is so much of the stuff at the 39 World's Fair.
Yes.
I wish we would have another World's Fair. Maybe the Museum of Everything will be able to organize one. I think
The
Miami
Museum of
could
Everything
certainly
is
use one.
supposed to be one. This is
Yeah.
I think, our conception
Well,
of...
but part of the point of the World's Fair is that everyone brings their newest, best stuff.
That's true as well, but I mean that should be part of what happens. I mean we will be an ideal site for a fairground of in perpetuity, people bringing the most amazing advances in technology, science, and research, and art and architecture, and bringing them together in a single place. That is a fairground for the imagination. That should be what the Museum of Everything becomes. All right. So in any event, 1-0 in my favor. What is the second question to me?
Iwo Jima is mostly flat. It has one mountain on it. What is the name of that mountain?
Mount Suribachi.
That is correct. I may have made these slightly too perfect.
No, if I hadn't had that on the tip of my brain, it just wouldn't have popped out ever.
No,
But,
that's good. That's
I
good.
spent a decent amount of time reading memoirs of Marines who fought on Iwo Jima, the best of which is With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge. And boy, is it
incredible
memorable.
book.
So,
Yeah.
yes, an incredible book and highly recommended. And obviously one of the bloodiest conflicts of the Second World War. In any event, we'll have
And of
we'll
course,
have to do
the most famous photograph of the Second World War, the flag being raised on Iwo Jima, is atop Mount Suribachi.
and became one of the finest war monuments in history. All right, second question to you. When King Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, he enacted the Indemnity and Oblivion Act, which forgave anyone who had participated in the Civil War against his father, with the exception of those who had signed the death warrant against his father and had him executed, the so-called regicides. And so most of the regicides were rounded up and executed. 20 or so escaped to the continent, that is continental Europe, and 3 went to the United States. What were the names of the 3 New England regicides?
Those were Whaley, Dixon, and Goff.
You're very close. I think I should give this to you. It's Whaley,
no,
Dixwell, and Goff.
Dixwell. Okay. Yeah. Well,
We should give that to you because you clearly Whaley, Dixwell, and Goff. They escaped to the United States. They were.
I was thinking of the Mason-Dixon line.
And of course, this was before the United States became the United States, so we were still under the rule of the crown. But there was a substantial amount of sympathy, especially because New England was heavily Protestant. These men were Protestant, so they were sheltered from their inquisitors trying to track them down in New England, and subsequently had streets named after them in New Haven. So Whaley, Dixwell, and Goff Avenues, as they have now become.
Yes, they're the 3 primary roads through New Haven, and Dan and I, being brothers, both come from New Haven. So this is you can still see the Regicides Cave just outside of town if you're curious. Climb up a hill and look at it. It's an interesting spot. Have you ever been up there?
I have not.
I have. It's a good date site. It's a good place to walk with a date. Very, very
Noted.
pretty. Looking down on the Valley of Woodbridge and so forth.
All right. So, what is second question? Have you asked me second question yet?
No, yeah, I have. You got Ploiești and you got Mount Suribachi. This one's
Okay. So
slightly
this is third
tougher,
question
but
to me then.
we're sticking with the Second World War theme. What was Anzio Annie, and specifically, what caliber was it?
Anzio Annie was a gigantic railway gun designed by the Germans.
Yeah.
And
It was the Krupp K5 was its technical name.
and I know that it was capable of hurling a more or less Volkswagen-sized shell, but I don't.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a range of 15 millimeters on either side of the correct answer. So if you can get within
Did they actually? I guess they did measure it in millimeters. So
Yeah.
only 15. That doesn't seem like a lot. I'm thinking of it as a very large gun. And so very large in my mind is something around 300 millimeters.
Boy, you were so close to being within 15. You're 17 millimeters away. You know what? I'm going to give that to you because that was very close. It's 283 millimeters.
283 millimeters.
I almost said 20 millimeters either side. 300, very, very
All right,
close.
I think that's
Yeah.
fair. However, if it's 283 millimeters, doesn't that sound to you like it's really a measurement in inches?
Well, no, because it's 11.1 inches. And the Germans love the metric system.
They do, the lousy fellows. But it still seems to
Interestingly,
me...
Anzio Annie was actually 2 guns because the Allies didn't realize that there were 2 of these Krupp K5s shooting at them. They thought there was just one, so they nicknamed them Anzio Annie.
You know, It's really it's 11 and 5/32 of an inch. I know that seems I don't know. It seems strange to choose 283
Well, I
millimeters.
don't think they started from the size of the barrel. I think they started from the gauge of the railway and put the largest gun they could on it, and that was 283 millimeters.
It's possible. It's possible. In that case, I have three questions right, and you have one, and you're due your last question. So I will have won this round, but I think we should ask the third question in any
Yeah,
event.
why not?
All right. So, in what year did Deep Blue famously beat Gary Kasparov in their second six-game tournament? Gary Kasparov had won the first tournament 4-2, and then Deep Blue came back the next year and beat him. Although Kasparov claimed that Deep Blue had made such
Kasparov
an
disputes this.
yes, he claims that the computer had made such an interesting move that it could not have been generated by a computer, and so he thought there must have been a human grandmaster behind the scenes. Although there's no evidence that this was the case. I'm gonna give you a couple of years on either side, but
98.
that's close enough. It was 97. So.
Okay.
1997, Gary Kasparov is famously defeated by Deep Blue. Although he disputes it, we, I think, can regard it as an authentic victory for the machine.
I think so. It's the idea that the move was too inventive to qualify as a computer move. Sort of, if you're
Defeats
saying
the
the
purpose.
computer, can only play me if it's using conventional moves, it's sort of. I mean, I understand why you thought that, but
In any event, the way chess computers work nowadays is very different from back then, when essentially the computer was trying to brute force the problem by calculating every possible outcome from every that is the likelihood of expectation of winning from every single move it could possibly make, trying to calculate that in sort of a very largely increasing tree of possibilities down the road. It was a lot of brute force calculations, and things work rather differently now. So completely different schema.
yeah, I think chess computers now just look at the series of what other games have played in similar circumstances.
That was an intermediate stage, and now I believe that they try to understand what the best possible path is towards winning, rather than all the possible paths they could possibly take. And so it's a more strategic approach. In any event, that was a big moment. I was 10 years old when that happened. I was old enough just to remember it, though, and it was definitely in the papers. That's the end of our Museum of Everything pub trivia round. I win this one. And I do have some good questions left over for next time. Electro. Yeah, that's too bad. But Electro must have been very impressive. I think that we should try to reincarnate him if we can. I actually did some research into this because I thought obviously having an Electro would be great for the museum. And I had found a place that some museum claimed to have it, but clearly you can see from photographs completely different and so certainly not the real Electro. It raises the possibility as to whether there was more than one, but from everything that I can tell from the footage and the photographs you can see of the fair, there was a very particular Electro, and I think it may just not exist anymore. It seems more likely than not.
So much of the stuff from the fair was destroyed.
Yes, destroyed, dismantled. Maybe it's hiding in Westinghouse's basement somewhere, but chances are it was simply taken apart, maybe given out piece by piece to the men who designed it or something like that. But as far as I can tell, it's no longer extant, which is a shame, but I don't think that it's beyond the possibility that we could reconstruct it. It was designed to be able to do a number of things. It could speak. That part was essentially speaking from pre-recordings, but also they were triggered by voice command, which was really impressive. It's probably the first voice command activated thing ever. It could count to 5 on his fingers. He could smoke a cigarette. He had a little bellows apparatus that allowed
Back in the
him
good
to,
old days when robots smoked cigarettes.
he had to have the cigarette lit for him, but once it was lit for him, he had a mechanical bellows apparatus
Couldn't
that would
Sparko
actually
light it for him?
apparently not. And he could also walk after a fashion. He followed a sort of track in the ground, but he could walk by advancing 1 foot, which would sort of push him, or rather pull him along the ground. Really interesting machine, and one that people absolutely loved. And as I say, you can look at color footage of him doing his various tricks. So up until last time, we had got up to the top 10 James Bond films on our list. And right after we finished our last episode, we discussed we were getting into the really good Bond films for the first time. and we discussed For Your Eyes Only was the one that I went off and watched it right away after we were done with our podcast, and I really enjoyed it, I have to say. It was almost exactly as good as I remember it being. The best parts by far are the underwater scenes, which they did really well. And I think there's something always exciting about exploring a shipwreck, especially if there are bad guys there trying to kill James Bond. One thing, though, is this must have happened during the movie came out in 81, and it's very Winter Olympics heavy. So was this filmed at the same Olympics where the Miracle on Ice happened?
No, that was in Lake Placid in 80.
But this movie came out in 81.
Was it 82?
This movie came out in 81.
These must have been qualifiers for
Miracle
Lake
on Ice
Placid
was in 1980. So
okay, so these were probably qualifiers beginning already for the next Winter Olympics. Where was it in 84? Was
no, but
84
I mean,
Innsbruck?
if the movie came out in 81, presumably it was being filmed in 1980, wouldn't you say?
So they may have been qualifiers for Lake Placid, but
it definitely was
don't really
over
know.
in Europe somewhere. You got the impression, and they were very
Olympics. It's in North Italy. It's like around Turin, I think.
Yeah, there was Olympics fever in the air, certainly, and the movie leans rather too heavily in this. I mean, it's almost two separate movies. There's the aquatic part filmed in the warm climes, and then there's all this Winter Olympic stuff, some skiing stunts and things like that. And they don't really gel together particularly well. I was never really fascinated by the Winter Olympics part. It could have been almost, in my view, left out of the movie. The rest of it, all the smuggling operations and everything, is quite good.
The James Bond movies really want to make a chase on a bobsled run work. They've tried more than once, and they don't work. They are not exciting.
In this one, James Bond jumps into a bobsled track on skis after a bobsled, and there's a motorcyclist chasing him, also in the bobsled track, and it almost works. But then you think
it's a lot better than the one in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Mechanically, not a sensible way of killing James Bond. All you can say is that it is a more effective way of killing him than sending out ice hockey players to body check him to death, which, as you pointed out, also happens in this movie and is one of the worst.
It's a real low point.
But despite that, it's a really good movie. It has a lot of genuine and exciting points, and even though, as you know, I'm not hugely in favor of James Bond car chases generally, I really do like the 2 CV car chase at the beginning.
It's definitely my favorite car chase. It's not my favorite car scene, but it is my favorite car chase.
One thing I had forgotten is that after his White Lotus Esprit is destroyed, he gets a new one in red.
Yeah.
So this is it's a really good movie, and I think our assessment of it stands as not being a great Bond film, but a very good one that I would go back and watch and enjoy. Although since then we have watched another movie on the top of our list, and so the difference between a good Bond movie and a great Bond movie is quite noticeable, but we'll get there. So we should pick up the list with number 10, the 10th greatest Bond movie of all time, License to Kill. And this is an interesting choice for me.
I think I had License to Kill at 9, so you must have added 11.
That's possible. License to Kill I wouldn't have called it a top 10 Bond film if you'd asked me just off the top of my head, is License to Kill a top 10 Bond film?
It's a really good movie.
I
watched it pretty
no.
recently, and it was, I already thought well of it. It was better than I remembered. It suffers slightly from one unnecessarily gory scene.
I'd say there are 2 unnecessarily gory scenes.
But one is completely unnecessary and stupid when a guy explodes in a low pressure chamber. I mean, there's no reason for that.
That really, as a child, was horrifying.
By far the scariest thing in any James Bond movie.
But then also, there are these 2 bad guy deaths that we really don't like in this film. And so there's that one where the chief bad guy suspects, thanks to Bond, that his second in command is defrauding him, and he kills him by putting him in a hyperbaric chamber and releasing the pressure quickly, which, according to the movie, causes his head to explode very unpleasantly. And then at the end of the film, James Bond fighting. This was this a concept in earlier Bond films, would you say, of like the bad guy having a chief hand? Oh yeah, it's like a Vargas type thing in Thunderball. The bad guy has a chief enforcer, and the enforcer is really hard to kill, and Bond has to finish him off in a fight in the last probably 15 or 20 minutes of the movie before he gets to the last bad guy.
I mean, that's very standard James Bond stuff.
Yeah, it is.
You've got the Blofeld type figure, and then you've got the Red Grant type figure.
And so the character in this movie gets killed by being dropped into a cocaine block cruncher upper machine.
Yeah, which is bad, but it's It's not
I
as
was
bad as seeing
horrified by
someone's
that
head
too.
explode.
That both of these, not only did both of these things rather horrify me, but the movie begins also in a rather horrifying way with Felix Leiter being eaten by a shark.
This is much.
Does it not? I mean,
Yeah, no, it's much more violent than any preceding James Bond movie,
and I
which
think
is
that's
one
why
of the
we
reasons.
didn't like it as children.
But on the other hand, it has so many redeeming features that it's raised in my estimation a lot over
All right,
the
so
years.
I
And
think that the thing to say then is that it has risen in our estimation since we first started watching it, because the first
because
time
we're
we
not
saw
children anymore.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was certainly many years before we came back to this at all. I think that we had regarded it for a long time as one of the worst Bond films. And then when we rewatched it as adults, we appreciated it more. And now it is jumped up into the top 10, apparently. But so the problems are that it's more violent than it really should be. What are the redeeming features?
Well, it's got a very strong lead performance from Timothy Dalton, who has fantastic chemistry with the Felix Leiter, who they chose for this movie. Up until they had the guy in the Craig movies, who's Jeffrey Wright, I think his name is. There had never been a returning Felix Leiter before. There was always a new Felix Leiter in every movie. And they brought this guy back, not from the preceding movie. People forget that the preceding Timothy Dalton movie also has a Felix Leiter in him, but he's so forgettable, no one could even picture him. But this guy was in Live and Let Die. And for some reason, after several intervening Felixes, they brought him back for License to Kill, and he's fantastic. And you really believe that he and James Bond have been through a lot together. They go on an opening mission together, and then he is almost killed, and his wife is murdered. And you really believe the pathos of James Bond throwing everything aside so he can get personal revenge for this vicious attack on his close friends. And it drives the movie in a much more emotionally plausible way than most James Bond movies.
It's true. It's kind of a revenge film. And to that end, I think that's one of the reasons that I'm never going to really love this film. I mean, it's exciting by itself, but the overtone of revenginess that gets set up at the very beginning with everything seeming great, and then essentially Felix Leiter's wedding is interrupted and his wife is murdered. That's a very dark way to begin a James Bond film. Very dark.
Yeah. But when you compare it to so many other James Bond movies that have very silly premises, this one is pleasantly grounded in believable stakes.
Yes, and I suppose that James Bond isn't really pursuing someone who wants to blow up the world. He's pursuing a fairly ordinary violent criminal for the sake of avenging the death of his best friend's wife, which makes sense.
Yeah, and he's a very bad guy. He's a major drug dealer and murderer. He's also played so well. Robert Davi, is that his
Look
name?
up his
Robert
name.
Davi. I think it's Robert Davi. Maybe my favorite James Bond bad guy performance in the entire series. He's so good.
You're right. His name is Robert Davi.
He is, he's got that perfect combination of obviously being a very bad guy, but also charismatic and likable in a way that you think, well, if I worked for this guy, I'd probably like him. I mean, he seems like a good boss and a pleasant guy to be around. He pays well. He's, probably got a good dental plan. And he's got great chemistry with Timothy Dalton, who sort of pretends to work for him for part of the movie.
I want to put a word in for Timothy Dalton. We're going to discuss him again because
I love
Timothy
Timothy
Dalton's
Dalton.
two films for us are both in the top 10 of great James Bond films of all time. Timothy Dalton is a wonderful James Bond. He's really brilliant. And I wish they'd made more films with him. They
And
only
the
made
reason
two.
they didn't is because if you didn't already hate Never Say Never Enough, the reason they didn't make another Timothy Dalton movie is because there were lawsuits involved in Never Say Never. Never Say Never Again is a remake of Thunderball. Thunderball, before it was a novel that was turned into a movie, it was a screenplay that was turned into a novel because no one wanted to make the original screenplay before the James Bond franchise started. The guy who co-wrote the script with Ian Fleming claimed ownership of some of the characters. And this led to years and years of lawsuits over ownership of various aspects of the James Bond movie franchise. And these lawsuits came to a head just after License to Kill came out. And so there was 6 years of lawsuits where there were no new James Bond movies. And by that time, Timothy Dalton had moved on to other stuff in his career. He considered coming back, but he didn't feel like doing it again. So they got him Pierce Brosnan, I love Pierce Brosnan, but I would have loved another Timothy
There
Dalton
was
movie.
that dark period when there is so many years with no James Bond films being made at all, and it seemed like the franchise
now.
was over.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Now is a little bit different. We do expect new films to show up, and also we expect them not to be good. I think back then the films were good, although I don't think that the reception for License to Kill was particularly positive at the time.
Perhaps not. But the reason that it didn't have a sequel for years was not because it was a financial failure. It was because of legal action preventing production of a new movie.
Let's see. Despite grossing more than 4 times its budget, License to Kill has made the lowest inflation-adjusted box office return out of all the 25 official Bond films. The only other Bond
Which
movie...
is appalling.
The only other Bond movie with kill in the title, View to a Kill, also directed by John Glenn, has the second lowest inflation-adjusted return of any Bond movie. Interesting.
Well, that was a much less good movie, though.
Yes. Well, this movie, I would definitely watch it again, but I'm not sure that I would enjoy or look forward to watching it as much again as I would say to For Your Eyes Only, which I really did enjoy seeing again. In my view,
it's a matter of personal taste. I find this to be, despite all the violence, it's also a very charming movie. I love the stuff with Q. James Bond quits MI6 so he can pursue revenge against the guy who murdered Felix's
wife. The original title of this film was going to be License Revoked. They thought
Great
that no
title.
Americans would know what revoked meant. So
yeah,
yes, at the beginning of
those snobbish English producers.
At the beginning of the film, he wants to avenge Felix Leiter, and M says no and revokes his license to kill. And so James Bond goes off on his own. This is his sort of freelance mission movie.
Yeah, including a joke that I didn't get for years. When he hands over his Walter PPK to M, he says, it's a farewell to arms. And I didn't realize that they were filming that at Hemingway's house in Key West.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it completely went over my head.
It's
I guess
funny
I assume it went over most people's heads because unless they don't say in the movie that it's Hemingway's house, but
I can picture the balcony and those slanted shutters very well. It's a very striking house.
Well, we drove past Hemingway's house when you and I drove to Key West.
I remember, and we would have stopped, except there were other people there. I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah, there's friggin' tourists interrupting with our looking around.
In any event,
so he quits MI6. But then Q, because, he and Q have been arguing for 15 movies, but Q isn't going to leave him out in the field by himself. So he packs up some of his best gadgets and comes to this fictional Central American country to help out. And it's fantastic. And Timothy Dalton and Desmond Llewellyn, all of their scenes are fantastic, including the ones in the other movie, The Living Daylights. And it's really fun seeing that, Q, despite his arguing with James Bond for years, has got a very sort of paternal relationship with him.
I agree. Relationship-wise, the movie works out very well. I will give this film another chance soon. And I think it's a very good James Bond film. If this had just been my list, the ordering of the last two would have been reversed, and it would have been For Your Eyes Only, probably near the top of the list. That's
a defensible position, but what I would say, probably the reason License to Kill comes above For Your Eyes Only for me is because I find the attempted murder by ice hockey players through body checks to be more objectionable than a man's head exploding.
I just don't. But anyways, that's number 10 on our list is License to Kill. Number 9, the 9th greatest Bond film of all time, The Spy Who Loved Me.
Great movie. I mean, these are all great movies from here.
These are all great movies. There is one thing I wanted to say though, which is I was going to save this for the very top of our list because we rewatched Thunderball very recently, and that is it's fantastic, great movie, one of the greats of all time, and I just highlights the difference between the plots that make sense and the plots that don't really make sense in my mind. Nowadays, no Bond plots make sense because they have this idea. They think, the writers and producers of the movie seem to think that the trope is there is a bad guy who wants to destroy literally the planet for no particularly good reason. Like, basically as a passion project or a hobby. He wants to destroy the planet so everyone can live underwater. He wants to destroy the planet so everyone can live in space. He wants to destroy the planet just for fun. Basically, the early Bond films were nothing like that. In Thunderball, the bad guy wants to threaten to destroy a city, basically just to blackmail governments into paying him a lot of money. Like that Spectre has stolen an atomic bomb and they want a huge ransom payment. That makes sense. In Goldfinger, the bad guy wants to use a nuclear bomb basically to irradiate Fort Knox's gold supply to make a lot of money.
It's a brilliant plot because it's a really good idea for a bad guy to do.
The point is that the earlier films, The bad guys are not crazy, kooky, living in hollowed out volcano
But
types.
this is one of the things that makes License to Kill so good, because License to Kill is not only completely plausible, it's probably happened in real life. I'm sure a drug lord has murdered someone's friend, and then that guy is
you
trying
might
to
say
kill
that
him in
that's
return.
it's relatively a little bit too, except for the revenge angle. Otherwise, it wouldn't have involved James Bond. The attempt to irradiate the world's gold supply makes a little bit more sense. But my point is that in all of these early movies, basically, the bad guys, Spectre, are being driven by very reasonable financial motive. Basically, they're just trying to extort a huge amount of money out of various people or make a lot of money for themselves. And that makes complete sense in a way that, the movie Spectre, which is one of our worst films of all time, not just worst Bond films, worst films of all time, just doesn't make sense. They decided that the real motivation for Spectre and for Blofeld should be childish revenge against a half-brother. Now, that is the sort of writing garbage that Hollywood is suffused with these days. It was so much better when they said, Spectre, serious criminal organization, what do they want to do? They want to make a huge amount of money by doing very audacious things on a large global scale. That makes sense. Not destroying the world just because they hate it, but finding out ways to threaten big parts of the world seriously enough to force people to pay them a lot of money. That makes total sense. And so this is one of these intermediate movies where I do really love The Spy Who Loved Me, but it does have a bad guy who's just kind of a little bit silly. He wants to live underwater, and he wants to destroy life on the planet above. And I never really buy that as a good bad guy motivation. I mean,
This is definitely the best of the silly James Bond movies.
the best of the silly James Bond movies. It has Jaws.
It has Jaws. It has the submarine Lotus Esprit.
The greatest Bond
It-
gadget?
Maybe. Certainly one of my favorites. I love the Lotus Esprit. It's such a beautiful car. I mean, it's not a DB5, but it's an incredibly beautiful car. It also has James Bond parachuting off a cliff with his very discreet Union Jack parachute, which is perhaps a little silly. I don't think normal MI6 agents escape from things with Union Jack parachutes.
Is this
but,
Roger Moore's best film? It is. We rated
yeah,
this.
definitely.
His best film by a fairly substantial margin. I think because there's good interplay between him and the Bond girl in this is a Russian agent. And
Yeah,
they
and
work well
Ringo's
together.
wife.
Ringo's wife in real life.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Barbara Bach.
They work really well together. And although she looks a little bit silly when she's holding her karate stance, when they're looking among the
But
ruins.
I think that's partly intentional. I'm pretty sure that in that moment she's supposed to look
I don't know.
a little silly, melodramatic.
I don't know. I will just say that it's a great film and one that we enjoy rewatching.
Yeah, and it has some of the truly iconic James Bond moments, like the Union Jack parachute, like Jaws, like the submarine Lotus Esprit. The supercarrier swallowing submarines seems a little silly, but it's less silly than the original version of the movie, which was You Only Live Twice, where it was a spaceship swallowing other spaceships.
But again, those are the parts that I kind of object to. So I think
but-
Carl Stromberg, he's the bad guy here.
Yeah.
He's well played, and he's a good bad guy as Bond bad guys go. But he's definitely on the kooky crazy side. Although I think the architecture is very imaginative, and his special bad guy pod that rises out of the ocean and everything, it's just a little bit on the too crazy side. And again, it culminates in one of these two big set piece fights that sort of like.
I completely disagree. I think it's probably the best big set piece fight.
I just don't like it that much.
I know. I find it really, it's very sort of inspiring when you've got this Russian crew, the American crew, the British crew, 3 nuclear submarines in this giant room designed by Ken Adams, the production designer. And, they all pull together and in
I
very
get that's supposed to be
heroic way.
inspiring. I don't really like the huge set piece fights. We discussed this
As a
in Race
rule,
Thunderball,
generally,
but-
I don't either, but this is definitely my favorite of all of those.
All right.
Well,
I mean,
I think it's definitely my favorite of all of
From
those.
my perspective, the things that I like about the Bond film are just elsewhere. And so when we get to the end of a film and it culminates in a big set piece fight, my brain basically switches off at that point. It's like I know exactly what the rest of the movie is going to be. So there's not much excitement to be had there. I prefer when James Bond is one-on-one doing some clever pursuit or something like that. This just has never really gripped me that much. And so, I don't know. Nonetheless, because I like Underwater aspects of any movie are generally good, so anything that includes flooding, sinking, and so forth are just interesting things to watch. They do a good job flooding the bad guy sets at the end of this film. I always found the way Bond kills off the bad guy to be particularly satisfying as well. I don't know exactly why.
Really? Actually,
Yeah.
I've always thought that was actually quite poor because it seems to me counterintuitive that the murder tube would be open at both ends.
I don't think it is, but the bullet will just shoot through the far end of the
See,
dart gun launcher.
Every time I watch that, I think, well, it's just good. He's going to shoot into the gun at the other end, and there'll
Yeah,
just be
but
an
it would blow
explosion
off
of
the
metal
back
and
of the
plastic.
gun. The gun that Carl Stromberg uses to shoot people underneath his very long table, probably just like a dart firing, compressed air pistol of some sort. I imagine a bullet would go through there without too much trouble. Doesn't really bother me. I always thought it was interesting. I was a little disappointed that they reuse the idea of having a shark tank into which you can drop people who you want to get rid of. That's too reminiscent of Thunderball. I mean, directly.
I mean, it's too reminiscent of about 6 other movies in the franchise.
Yeah. So, nonetheless, I mean, I enjoyed this movie a lot. It has some good location
It's funny
shots, too.
when the shark is killed by being bitten by a guy. It's a real reversal. That shark sure wasn't expecting that. And I love that Jaws survives. And Jaws is just a great character.
Jaws is a great character, and the scene in the Egyptian ruins where Jaws is pursuing Bond and Anya Masova is really well done, using the lighting and sound effects and everything. It has a lot
very
of...
menacing.
Yeah, very menacing, a lot of high tension. So even though it's a Roger Moore film, generally more on the silly side, it just works really well. I like almost everything in this film, despite the silly set piece at the end.
In Ray, that particular scene where this chase is happening through the light show going on at the pyramids, they couldn't light Roger Moore for one of those shots. So a shot of him sort of hidden behind a stone while Jaws follows this other guy into one of the pyramids is actually a still photograph. You probably never noticed if you've just been watching the movie like a normal person, but it's just a still photograph of Roger Moore that's been sort of pasted onto the film.
I also have to say, just overall, In Ray Jaws, who's one of our favorite characters and who was brought back for another film in Moonraker because he did so well, and then is given an actual character arc and everything, which is great because people liked him so much. You might think that it's just too silly of an idea to have a bad guy who kills people by biting them with his big metal teeth. However, when that subject is introduced and he kills that restaurateur in the telephone booth, it's actually very menacing and scary, even, I would say, but not so scary that as a child I was permanently traumatized by it. Whereas the whole Felix Leiter shark attack thing at the beginning of License to Kill was more in the latter category. So this is just a good film. It's exciting and suspenseful, and Roger Moore's best effort, I think.
Yeah. Though regarding the shark from the other movie, the License to Kill shark, it does produce one of the pithier remarks by a bad guy, the written note left on Felix after he's been attacked, which is he disagreed with something that ate him.
Yeah, even so, I would say really fails to lighten the mood there. In any event, so number 9 is The Spy Who Loved Me. Then number 8, which is only 8 because you ranked it way too low on your list. Number 8 is Skyfall.
Yeah, well, the point is, it's not that I like Skyfall less; it's that I like all the other ones more.
Yeah, but you ranked it on your list, therefore lower than The Spy Who Loved Me, lower than License to Kill. I think Skyfall is clearly better than both those films. Skyfall.
I love Skyfall. I really, really do. But I really love all of these movies.
You're overdoing it with your affection to The Spy Who Loved Me, for example. I mean, would you call The Spy Who Loved Me a masterpiece? Because I would call Skyfall a masterpiece.
Yeah, I would call The Spy Who Loved Me a masterpiece.
Yeah, but you have to think about it. I would not. Skyfall is a masterpiece. I'm going to say that it is one of the very greatest Bond films. It's a fantastic movie. I have watched it many times.
I wrestled a lot with my placement of Skyfall.
I think you ultimately placed it too low. You really should have bumped it up. Skyfall is just, it's so good. And it's not just because it was good relative to the other Daniel Craig films. It's just an objectively really good movie. I remember going to see it in the theater when it came out. I remember in particular that we bought tickets late and I ended up sitting in one of those seats that was like 2 rows from the front of the screen. And I watched the entire thing with a stiff neck and I still adored it. I thought it was fantastic movie. Has since seen it many times, and they
I
really
saw it on a date right after seeing the Picasso show at the Guggenheim, the black and white Picasso show at the Guggenheim, which was really good. So it was a good evening.
I don't remember that show, but I do remember seeing the movie, and they had sorted out.
Okay, well, we didn't see it together.
No, I know.
Yeah.
The point is that I was in New York at the time. I would have assumed that I would have seen the Picasso show. Don't think I did, but I definitely saw the film there. And they had sorted out most of the problems, I think, in the earlier version of the Daniel Craig character, in which they had made James Bond merely a thug for hire type character with none of the savoir-faire and refinement and humanity that Bond as a character should have. They had rectified all of those problems by the time they got to Skyfall and turned him into a serious version of the James Bond who we know and love. And they also gave him a deeper connection to his past. And also, they had really developed the Judi Dench M character to a point where she had a serious, understandable, defensible point of view that was now herself aging out from the contemporary. So when Judi Dench's M first comes onto the scene in Goldeneye, she is the one who's bringing a revolution to MI6, trying to separate it from the old ways and take it in a more bureaucratic direction. And now, in Skyfall, she is the last bulwark against the new tide that wants to do exactly the same thing. And she is trying to bring MI6 back to tradecraft and James Bondy styles of things. It works out really, really well.
Yeah, and also she is revealed to be the cause of all of the villainy being perpetrated by the villain, who has a very good reason for hating her because she has betrayed him. With what she thought were good reasons, but in fact, he has much better reason for resenting what she did.
Yes, Raul Silva or Thiago Rodriguez. Who is the character who plays him?
Javier Bardem.
Javier Bardem, an excellent and really scary actor, doing one of the best James Bond villains of all time. Because again, this James Bond, and I think this is central to what makes a great Bond film, this villain has absolutely understandable motivation. He was an agent working in MI6. He had done everything, although perhaps a little bit too much of everything for MI6, and he was betrayed and turned over by Judi Dench, by M. And so he wants revenge against her, which is completely understandable. And so, because the bad guy's mechanics and motivation make sense, the movie can unfold in a completely understandable way. And it also has that really moving scene where Judi Dench quotes from Odysseus, the poem, Tennyson's poem, while James Bond is running to save the day. Great poem, great scene. This has a lot of great scenes in it, though.
You have that great moment of Gareth Mallory, the guy who then goes on to become M, leaping into action to rescue the M who he's been arguing with in that. It's such a good movie.
Well, also, so
maybe I didn't rate it.
You definitely didn't rate it high enough. I'm going to say you messed up there.
Oh wait, I have it above The Spy Who Loved Me.
All right. Well, it should be higher on your list. What number is it on your list by itself?
It's 10 on my list, but
it's way, way, way too low. You probably put a bunch of garbage movies above that, and now it's too late to change it. So the world.
Well, no, the only movies we've done so far that are above it on my list are License to Kill and The World Is Not Enough.
Neither of those should really be. You put The World Is Not Enough way too high. Then
I love The World Is Not Enough.
It's not. You love it way too much. And you might say I love it not enough, but Skyfall deserves to be. I mean, in my reckoning.
See, now you said that you would rather watch Skyfall than The Spy Who Loves Me. I would rather
definitely
watch The World Is Not Enough than Skyfall.
I would rather watch. It depends on what you're in the mood for. It's a different style of film, but most of the time I'd rather watch Skyfall. Skyfall. Let me make one point.
Skyfall's a heavier movie,
if I may. Skyfall does successfully what Hollywood has been trying to do basically every year for the last 20 years or 30 years, which is to find a way to cash in on old IP that people like. And usually when Hollywood does it, it is in such a ham-handed, finger in the eye of real fans fashion that everyone hates it. Like when they tried to bring back James Bond's AMV8 Vantage in one of was it Inspector or something, or No Time to Die?
It's the DBS. It's in No Time to Die.
Things like that just really don't work. But in Skyfall, when James Bond is on the run and they open up the shed where his old things are stored and you see the Aston Martin DB5 there, the audience really reacted. And because you can tell it was done honestly by people who really understood the IP and what they were going for there. It was an amazing moment of connection with the fans, and you could feel it in the theater. And that's the sort of thing that we really
And then
love.
when he flips up the knob on the top of the gear shift knob and
go ahead and eject
the
me,
ejection
man. See if I care. It was
I love that.
Yeah, the
okay, you know what do we have next on the list? What's above this?
Above this on our combined list is Tomorrow Never Dies.
You see, I definitely prefer Tomorrow Never Dies. I would offer to rejigger these, but I can't because Tomorrow Never Dies
Okay,
is too good
I'm
a
not
movie.
going to argue with you on that. This is better than Tomorrow Never Dies, but we'll just say Skyfall is a great movie. It's one that you can
and
rewatch.
the scene where Judi Dench is reciting the end of Ulysses is one of my favorite scenes in any movie.
It's an actual moving scene, which is hard to
it really is.
It's hard to arrive at in modern Hollywood. A lot.
Can you recite that quickly for our audience?
I need a moment to put myself in mind of it.
Made weak by time and fate, right? That's how it begins.
Well, this is the end of the poem. It's a
Right,
longish
well,
poem. It's about 40 lines.
Yeah, right.
or
No,
so.
but we're just talking about what's quoted in the movie.
Well, what's the beginning of that excerpt?
I think she starts with "Made weak by time and fate."
There's a little bit before that I really love.
We
also.
are not now that strength we were.
Yes, we are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth. That which we are. And one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And it's a great
scene.
poem, and it's perfectly applied in that scene. And this is, I think, one of the things that people in general don't understand about literature and about poetry more especially, is that there is more to life than the consumption of and the understanding of facts. And that's where literature and poetry comes in. They're reaching deep truths by other means. You understand something, you actually feel it in your whole body with great poetry in a way that it's more than just stating the facts. We are a bunch of Confederates who are going to fight together and go explore stuff. That doesn't really have the same effect. It states the same facts. The way Tennyson expresses this touches a deep chord in us. And there's no other way to get to it. And if you haven't read the poetry and if you don't know it, you'll never have access to those feelings. You have to go out and explore them by yourselves. And it's not enough to read about Tennyson, read about poets, and absorb facts about what life was like back then. You got to read the poetry. I mean, it's not a hard job. It's like listening to great music, which also deserves to be listened to several times. You need to read it a few times, and you will then understand something new, or rather have connection to something that you already perhaps understood on a very deep level, but couldn't express. It's really worth doing. And if you don't know the
you can
poetry,
find a lot of these on Spotify if you want to listen to them. A few years ago, one of my top 10 most listened to songs for the year was a Kipling poem.
Well, I think that, and this is something that I have wanted to point out for a long time, which I don't think has ever really been a mainstream view. I mean, it used to be that of an evening in the days before radio and TV and so forth, entertainment was provided by the guests at a dinner party or by family. And so you would have an evening that included playing whatever instruments were at hand, piano, and also recitation. There was a lot of recitation of poetry was a popular thing. Now, in subsequent times, we still have this idea of going to concert halls and listening to great performers play the great Beethoven piano sonatas or symphonies playing the great Beethoven symphonies, but no one has really been able to popularize the idea of going to listen to a performance of poetry, a recitation of poetry, but I think it deserves that. Poetry is as great an art as great music, and it really does deserve to be performed because actually there's a lot in the interpretation of the way you emphasize the words and so forth. I mean, think of Shakespeare. That's what we're talking about. People go to see Shakespeare plays, but no one would go to see an hour of recitation of great poems, and I think that great poems are worth recitations because they need to be interpreted. They need to be performed in the right way.
Of course, this still happens at our parties. And last week when we when we had a party, we both recited.
We do
some
recite poetry at our parties, but it's a different.
That's
thing.
what makes the Museum of Everything system.
Absolutely. In any event,
in any event, I figured out why Skyfall is so far down on this ranking. It's because you have ranked You Only Live Twice above Skyfall.
Well,
you have to because I have it below.
Probably.
And we haven't done it yet.
No, we did do You Only Live Twice. You Only Live Twice is 11th on our list. We did that at the end of the last podcast.
Did we?
Yeah, we did. We spent a lot of time
I
talking
completely
about it.
forget that. Then why is it so low on the list? I mean, these are all such great movies. I would be willing to entertain the argument that Skyfall is in fact better than License to Kill and The World Is Not Enough, which would bump it up to 8.
In any event, Skyfall is, and we ended up in our collective ranking of its being 8. We'll just say it's one of the top 10 Bond films of all time. It's a very great movie, endlessly entertaining. I love how that there are a series of different movies essentially that flow one into the other. And so when he goes back in time, as it were, in the DB5 to Scotland, where the bad guy is going to come have the showdown with him, it's almost like a bonus movie at that point. So much has already happened up until that point. It becomes almost a different movie, but they flow together really well, and both are hugely exciting. It becomes sort of a Straw Dogs type movie of James Bond having to defend his house against this external attack of numerous guys. I love that. Except for when they destroy the DB5, which makes me so upset I can't watch it. I have to turn away. But
it really captures exactly what she was going for. The old abandoned house is England, made weak by time and fate,
but strong in will. It's
I don't normally talk about cinematography and things like that just because I think it sounds a little silly when people talk about how great cinematography is, but the cinematography in this movie is fantastic.
The long shots of the DB5 driving north in Scotland are beautiful.
And the shots of the fire in the field when he's running through it, especially when he's under the ice.
It's done really well. I mean, that's the thing. Is like there's nothing in this movie that I would say I just hate this and it has to be undone, except perhaps when Moneypenny at the beginning accidentally shoots James Bond, not because of that plot line, but just because I really don't like her as Moneypenny, and I just think she's
I think it would be total. I don't think she's a bad actress. I like her in the movie.
Think she
the only
is
thing I don't like about it is that it turns out at the very end that she's Moneypenny. They should have just made her someone else.
No, I kind of think she's a bad actress relative to the other people in this movie. I'm sorry. I just don't like her acting very much. I like everyone else in this film, including people I originally didn't like. It's possible I'll like her more in subsequent movies, but I have to say that this is another movie where the introductory scene also works super well. And the stunt driver is Ben Collins, who used to be the Stig on Top Gear. It's a really exciting beginning.
And they do the gun barrel without doing the gun.
Exactly. There are so many set pieces in this film, and each one works really well.
It establishes a superior personality than James Bond had in the other Daniel Craig movies, because he is unwilling to go ahead with the mission until he sees if he can save his colleague's life.
Yes,
which just tells you right from the beginning that he is a gentleman.
Exactly, the humanity is returned.
A loyal man, a man who's loyal to his friends.
The humanity element has returned to James Bond's character here, which was absent from the earlier Daniel Craig films, and he goes about his business in a solid British, stoic but manly way, which we can all admire. And I think that's why the film works so well. And so many pieces of this film you can enjoy even by themselves as individual little set pieces. Even one of the things which I thought I'd hate the most, which is they acknowledge they need to replace Q, and replacing him with an older John Cleese is probably not great. So they choose a really young guy who actually played Richard II, I think. And
fantastic performance, Richard II.
Yes, and he's a fantastic actor. And it just works really well.
Ben Winshaw, I think is his name.
I will say that didn't work as well. His character didn't work as well in the subsequent Daniel Craig films, but here it really
I think in
lands.
The subsequent movies they didn't get what made it so good in Skyfall.
They made him a little ridiculous.
The simplicity of it.
They can never, anytime they bring back anything or try to redo anything, and this is a problem in Hollywood in general, they usually miss the reason why people liked it in the first place, and they end up just making things silly. But here, this movie is great because despite the fact that they were also reviving some old IP, like bringing back the DB5, they actually had a lot of fresh and original creative ideas in this movie, and so it's really engaging. All throughout.
I hadn't really thought about this before, but going back to the poem again, the whole theme of this movie is that Britain has seen better days. It's not an important global force anymore, but it's still capable of doing great things, at least in the movies, when it harkens back to its glory days. And so in the Q scene, instead of having the estimable Desmond Llewellyn, the genuine war hero Desmond Llewellyn, you've got this young guy, but they're sitting in front of a brilliant Turner painting of an old ship being put out to
pasture,
for scrapping. Yeah, put out to pasture. So and which really captures the theme of the movie. And it's just
they do it really well.
It's a wonderful movie. I really, really like it a lot.
I could rewatch this movie numerous times. I have actually watched this movie numerous times, and this is another one of those movies where we're really at the top of our list now. They're all great films, but I'm not going to go back and watch The Spy Who Loved Me tonight. I could definitely go back and watch Skyfall tonight and have a ball.
I could too, honestly, but that's true for every single remaining movie on this list.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. That was number 8 on our ranking. Number 7, Tomorrow Never Dies, with Pierce Brosnan.
Okay, and we should say, just as a transition between Skyfall and Tomorrow Never Dies, the two greatest James Bond theme songs. Skyfall, incredible theme song. Tomorrow Never Dies, incredible theme song.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
But Tomorrow Never Dies has two incredible theme songs, because before they got Sheryl Crow to do the theme song, they already had a fantastic theme song, which still recurs in the score of the movie and then plays over the end credits. I strongly suggest you go and listen to it, because it's a fantastic song.
Before we pile into this film, I just want to say that when I first saw it, I did not like it, and it has risen in my estimation a lot since then.
Well, for both of us, it was the first new James Bond movie we ever saw. It was the first James Bond movie to come out after
Goldeneye?
we had become aware. We didn't. Well, yeah, we had seen Goldeneye already, but
You didn't see it in theaters.
No, we didn't see Tomorrow Never Dies in theaters either. It was the first DVD I ever watched. I think it was the first DVD you ever watched.
The first DVD I ever watched was Singing in the Rain.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, Tomorrow Never Dies is a better movie. Oh, come on.
Yes, you're right, it is.
Yeah, of course it is.
Anyways, Tomorrow Never Dies.
No, but we already knew who James Bond was when Tomorrow Never Dies came out. So it was like, it was the new James Bond movie. That was the first time that happened. Because Goldeneye came out, it was already part of, our consciousness. It was out before we were watching James Bond.
Was it? I don't remember. In any event, Tomorrow Never Dies, I really thought it was just too silly when it first came out. And since then, I don't know, it's grown on me, because we ultimately came to the conclusion that the idea of a bad guy trying to manipulate global news to make a lot of money is actually a very sensible plot.
Yeah, it turns out that might actually happen sometimes.
So, yeah. I mean,
unscrupulous journalists turns out to be a real thing.
It's hard then to say that it's just a ridiculous idea that could never happen.
And there is a lot of silly stuff in this movie, but it's so charming, and we said The Spy Who Loves Me is the best silly James Bond. Maybe it's really Tomorrow Never Dies. It's right on the threshold between the seriousness of Goldeneye, the relative seriousness of Goldeneye, and the increased silliness of The World Is Not Enough.
They use
Pierce Brosnan's second movie, but
they use a really interesting bad guy spy ship in this film.
Based on a real ship. And I assumed it was completely fictional when I first saw the movie, but it turns out the United States Navy actually built one of those stealth ships that looks just like that. It's called the Sea Cat or something.
And it's very reminiscent, the way the film begins, of For Your Eyes Only, because bad guys sink a British spy ship, essentially, by in the former case, in For Your Eyes Only, by using a naval mine, and in this case by using a remote control oil rig site horizontal drilling thingy, like a gigantic dentist drill bit that goes around and destroys the ship and sinks it in a very scary and dramatic way, and being directed by one of the, I would say, a little bit over the top bad guy henchmen. This guy, Mr. Stamper. I mean, yeah, I think that almost ruined the film for me. That is his character, because even the other bad guy characters, the guy who was the bad guy, Mr. Stamper's mentor,
is great.
Is a very funny guy. That German assassin character, so that stuff I really liked. I don't like the Stamper stuff. I was never crazy about the now we're going to torture you to death with all these tools scene and stuff like that. But, despite that, there are a lot of really good points. I will say that I never liked the Bond girl in this film, but I understand that she was a big Chinese actress and that there were other reasons for casting her.
I guess they were trying to appeal to the Chinese market for the
first
time with this movie. I can only assume. I'm not a huge fan of hers either, but
what's her name?
She Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle Yeoh.
She's not bad. She's right for the part.
I just never found her very likable, and so I couldn't really get into the chemistry between Pierce Brosnan and her, because I didn't really see that there was any. And so that is a disappointment of the movie, despite the fact that the movie itself is quite entertaining. I mean, he has better chemistry with the bad guy's wife, who was an old flame of his, apparently, and sort of that sets off the plot of the movie at the beginning. But
so we've now covered the only bad parts of the movie, and we can go into the many, many good parts of the movie. For instance, the opening scene at the black market. It turns out the black market is a real place. It's in the mountains of
What do you mean the opening
Eastern...
scene? This is not the pre-credit scene.
Yeah, the pre-credit scene.
What is the pre-credit scene?
There's a black market where jets and machine guns and nuclear weapon are being sold, and James Bond is surveilling it, and he has to go in and retrieve this nuclear weapon before it can be blown up by a missile.
So one of those pre-credit scenes that has nothing to do with the subsequent movie.
More or less, yeah.
But is a good scene, except that I don't like the way he rocks in his plane when he's firing the plane's machine guns on the ground. He's just like, I think that's very silly.
It's funny, I had never noticed that.
Very silly, and that almost ruins that scene for me, I will say. But it's a good scene.
Come on.
No, it does. It's a good movie in the overall Pierce Brosnan style. I suspect that you actually like it a little bit more than I do. I like it, but certainly was higher on your list than mine. So tell us all the great things about it.
Well, so aside from a fantastic opening scene, we have a fantastic Q scene, which introduces the only realistic spy car in the entire series, which is a very discreet looking gray BMW 740IL, which is remote control, can be controlled from
this is actually my favorite scene in the movie, I think,
a cell phone.
Is when he's remote controlling the car and trying to get out of the garage.
Favorite, yeah. This is what I said before, that the 2CV chase from For Your Eyes Only is my favorite chase scene, but this is my favorite car scene. The car fight in the parking garage.
It's really good.
Where Pierce Brosnan is in the back seat driving the Q car around, the Q BMW around. Fantastic, just hilarious, very entertaining fight scene between a bunch of bad guys in a car with Pierce Brosnan piloting it in the back seat.
Which ends with the car destroying an Avis dealership, which I kind of like.
Funny, yeah.
What else is there?
There's a fight in the paper factory, the newspaper printing. I love a good newspaper printing press.
That's good too.
An appearance of an H&K P7, one of the greatest guns of all time.
Who's using that?
The bad guy who, says I could shoot you from Stuttgart and still create the appropriate effect.
Yes.
Who James Bond.
The amusing assassin.
The amusing assassin, Mr. Stamper's mentor. The motorcycle chase through Vietnam,
where they're handcuffed together and both riding a motorcycle.
Yeah. The swimming through the sunken ship you were just talking about, exploring sunken ships always being good, as is this. The Halo jump. Oh, they bring back Jack Wade from Goldeneye, which I love.
He's a great character, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, at this point they should have just dropped Felix Leiter. He had his moment and gone with Jack Wade, and I'm really sorry they didn't. Jack Wade's only in those two movies. But really, Joe Don Baker is the actor who plays him. Perfect foil for the more serious Pierce Brosnan.
I would say the early Pierce Brosnan movies did an uncharacteristically good job creating great secondary characters, because there's also
and original stuff. Valentin Zukovsky, who comes back in the
World Is Not Enough. Those two guys, Valentin Zukovsky and Jack Wade, are fantastic secondary characters, and a big part of why we like these movies so much. They add tremendously to the charm and depth.
The Pierce Brosnan movies, compared to the Daniel Craig movies, they didn't just go back for the nostalgia angle. They tried to do new things. I mean, they didn't even use Aston Martins in the first three ones. They had to get away with BMWs. And they carved out their own niche. Yeah, well, but I hated that at first too. But the Z8 is so beautiful, and the 740IL is so fun that I've gotten over that in time.
In any event, it's a great film. I think that we have it sort of reversed in our rankings. So, I mean, between the two, again, I would sooner watch Skyfall than Tomorrow Never Dies, even though Tomorrow Never Dies has a lot of great stunts and interesting.
This also introduces the Walther P99, which is one of my favorite pistols.
Yes, I guess it does.
Yeah.
But anything else?
How can you pin down, how can you describe the beauty of a rainbow?
You say this, but I think there were more obvious things for us to talk about that we liked in Skyfall. I'm just going to point that out. I think that Tomorrow Never Dies is a great film, but you're ranking it a little bit too high. There may even be a nostalgia element in this. It's a very fun movie, but I think Skyfall is definitely a greater movie.
Well, another thing that definitely sticks out in my mind about Tomorrow Never Dies is the score. Not just the theme song, but the score for the entire movie, which uses themes from the secondary theme song, the original theme song, which plays over the credits, is fantastic.
I will also say that just to take the outside audience poll, because my wife had never seen any James Bond films, and we're gradually introducing her to them, as you know. And she liked Dr. No. She loved Thunderball. She didn't really like Tomorrow Never Dies that much, and it's possible that she needs to see it more than once. But I don't know. I think there are other Pierce Brosnan films, or to be
has
particular,
she seen Skyfall?
No, but I am going to show that to her. Perhaps that would be the next one.
The thing is that I made this list on a specific day. If I had made it on a different day, it might have been slightly different.
But the entire point is,
of course, this is now definitive.
Yes,
because we've said it's definitive.
We can always return to this subsequent year, but I would say you probably have these two things flipped in terms of quality. For me, at least, Skyfall is better than Tomorrow Never Dies. In any event, let's move on to number 6.
Okay, which one of these movies do we quote more?
Skyfall. Well, no, with one exception.
We don't. Well, what do you mean with one exception?
With one exception, there's one line that happens to be really useful, which is, this
with one exception,
this happens.
But,
things like this happen.
Not
to me, is what Mr. Emmett says, the chief bad guy of the film. Like we just love that line. It's a fun line. It's useful in a lot of situations. When people say like it's okay that this bad thing happens because bad things like that happen, you can always say not to me. Anyway,
and we both do a lot.
Yes, but that line is not enough to make the movie better than Skyfall. Anyways, let's move on to number 6. Number 6 on our list is a movie that we both agree is fantastic, and it is Goldeneye, the first appearance of Pierce Brosnan. One of the great films, and it's so lovable that, no matter how many times I watch this, I'm always going to enjoy watching it again, despite the fact that I really, especially when it first came out, although I was a little on the young side, but I think they give Xenia much too much, I don't know. The way she goes around killing people is not appropriate for children. And
right.
It's just not
It's
appropriate.
a little too M-rated.
Yes.
Or R-rated. I don't know why I said. Well, it's because I'm thinking of video games, which are rated M when they're for adults. And because the way we were introduced to GoldenEye was, of course, through the N64 classic video game, GoldenEye.
That's worth discussing, too. I think that the video game had a certain amount to do with the overall success of the iconography of GoldenEye. Because this is probably the greatest video game of all time.
Yet, yes and no, because one of the reasons it's the greatest video game, one of the greatest video games of all time, is because it did not come out at the same time as the movie. People forget this. It came out like 2 years later.
No, we don't forget that.
Because they wanted it to come out to correspond with the movie, and the team was like, well, we're not done. This game sucks. We haven't finished it yet.
That doesn't strike me as bizarre at all. I had assumed it came out a few years after the movie.
Yeah, that's the thing that normally kills video games that are tied into movies, the fact that they're rushed out before they're really finished.
To return to GoldenEye, the film, rather than the video game, it is one of the greatest films in the James Bond franchise. We rate it as number 6 overall. Pierce Brosnan's first outing, and so it's his most serious, his most Sean Connery-esque in the way.
Yeah, he starts. We're coming off the Timothy Dalton movies, which were quite serious, and sort of as they go along, he goes from Timothy Dalton, Sean Connery type serious to more Roger Moore. And GoldenEye is just one of those almost perfect movies.
I think because
talk
again,
about the slight vulgarity.
The bad guy has really understandable motivation. Not only does he have really understandable motivation, but this is one of the few films where they don't make the bad guy completely obvious from the beginning. Sean Bean, great role. As we like almost all Sean Bean movies. Just generally speaking, Sean Bean is a great character to all. I mean, he always brightens up a movie by dying in it, and he starts out the movie as sort of the best good guy, best friend James Bond situation. And so
006.
Yeah, but they set this up really well. They give an element of suspense, and I don't know exactly what the right word is for it, but it's a more twisty-turny plot than most James Bond films would ever have, because the guy we think is the bad guy is not really the bad guy. I mean, there's a lot of well-worked out character development, I would say. And again, because the motivating factor for the bad guy makes a lot of sense. You know, when you think about it, when we're getting to the greatest of James Bond films, it really is having a sensible motivation for the bad guy as opposed to something completely stupid and ridiculous. If Hollywood got that through their heads, I think they would do better James Bond films and better films in general. So again, like,
yeah, and in a certain sense, Sean Bean's character is totally right. It's, as is pointed out in the movie, it's one of the low moments in the history of Britain was turning over allies of theirs from the Second World War to Stalin to be executed. That's the backstory of the bad guy.
Our treatment of you know, the Eastern Bloc, Eastern Europe at the end of the Second World War is one of the most shameful elements in the history of the West. And it had everything to do with the fact that basically the intellectuals in the West were they were so worried about fascism that they forgot about communism, or even rather took a shine to it when fascism and communism started fighting each other, which is not how they originally started at the beginning of the war, of course. As we've pointed out, Soviet Russia and Hitler invaded Poland together, and Poland ended up being given to the Russians, who were the original attackers, along with the Nazis. It's really shameful, and so yeah, Sean Bean has a certain point here.
Basically, the philosophy of the West was, you know, to hell with Eastern Europe. We're tired of war, which was understandable. And it's much easier to say now that was obviously a morally incorrect decision than looking back, because the world had just been through the Second World War. But the way that we abandoned the Eastern Europeans to Stalin was highly disgraceful and a very strong motivation for a bad guy who wants revenge against Britain.
Yes, indeed. Some of the set pieces they come up with here are absolutely fantastic, and who will ever get tired of watching that gigantic antenna thing come out of the water? And
no one ever. And the sad thing is that just fell down a couple of years ago. Yeah,
which they allowed to. I mean, where is it, in Brazil or?
I think it's Puerto Rico, and they just allowed it to decay until the point it collapsed down onto its dish and was destroyed.
It's really a shame. Gigantic radar antenna. Radar telescope, really a fantastic thing. You know, it's one of the sort of thing that you'd like to have in the museum, even though the scale is absolutely magnificent. But that's what makes it so interesting, this gigantic radar dish, which they actually built.
Nothing better than gigantic constructions.
Yes, I mean, it was a really imaginative undertaking, and it's exactly the sort of thing that James Bond films are supposed to shine a light on. They're supposed to take us to locations that you think are improbable, but that actually do exist. That gives the audience a chance to see something amazing, not just ridiculous, like going off into space on Moonraker 7. It should be taking us to see really exceptional things that actually do exist. And that's what Goldeneye does particularly well, with the dam at the very beginning, where James Bond does this incredible bungee jump, and then we go to visit the radar dish at the end. There's just a lot of really good things in this film.
And then driving a tank through buildings and cars.
What a great
St. Petersburg?
Scene. Is that one of the best scenes in all of James Bond?
I mean, we've been talking about the best car chases. If we include all vehicle chases, I think this is the best.
I think it's number one. Seeing Pierce Brosnan come out of the rubble of the tank and then fix his tie like that before he drives off is a perfect James Bond moment. Absolutely Compeki, could not be improved upon. So
yeah, and the preceding scene where he's arguing with Defense Minister
Dmitry Mishkin. You used to quote that all the time. I think that was your favorite scene growing up.
It's a fantastic scene, and they have just fantastic interplay between the two of them.
The writing is really good. The James Bond girl here, Natasha Romanova, is she's well written, well cast.
No, Natasha Romanova is Tanya Romanova is from Russia with Love.
So
this is Natalia Simonova something or other.
Yeah, Simonova. And I will say, though, that, again, the only things about Goldeneye that I don't like are all to do with the Xenia character, which, in a desire to create a fearsome...
mid-90s...
It's a little campy. It's a little campy, a little too grotesque. Certainly more than it needs to be. I think they overdo the murder scene at the beginning, where she shows up and kills all of the programmers at the Svernaya radio station or whatever. They really overdid that. They overdo it almost every time she's on screen, and I don't particularly like her because they just made her character so incredibly vulgar, and I think that was unnecessary. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and if they changed that, the movie wouldn't be as good, but it's really hard to say. And
I would say looking back on the movie, just thinking about it, that's the only misstep I can think of.
Yeah, but it occurs fairly repeatedly just because every time she's on screen, she's doing something I object to. Even as a bad guy's henchman, you'd think that would be a silly thing to say, and yet that's the case. However, there are so many redeeming features that it's really hardly worth mentioning, including the scene where she's racing James Bond in her 355, her Ferrari 355, which is a great little car sequence.
And introduces the DB5 to go along with the BMWs in the movie.
And also the way he meets the Bond girl, Natalia, that is when they wake up together in a helicopter that's about to destroy itself with its own air-to-air missiles, is a really good moment. The way they get out of that is good and creative. I find a lot of the film, again, is if you cut it up into individual set pieces, to just be really exciting and compelling. And
also, that scene takes place in a Soviet graveyard for statues. That is, in a post-Soviet graveyard for Soviet statues that have been taken down, which are real places all over the former Soviet Union and are incredible. And I've been trying to track some down that we could get some monuments from for the museum.
It's
for a while now.
It's another example of a really good setting, a place that really exists that people have never seen before. And so the James Bond film doing what it's supposed to, bringing us to places that are exciting to explore, that are interesting and intriguing, that really do exist, and where you could imagine things like this unfolding. So it is.
And also it's the movie that introduces Jack Wade and Valentin Zukovsky, both of who become recurring characters, completely original, brilliant additions to the movie. They're not trying to dig up old stuff from the franchise, just writing new characters who work really well.
Everything
and then
really
the Q scene, one of my favorite Q scenes.
Wait, before we get to the Q scene, I would just say that I guess they put so much thought into this because James Bond had been off the screen for quite a while at this point.
Yeah, it gave him time, I guess, to write a really good script.
And I remember you say that the subsequent movie was the first one in which James Bond was in our consciousness. I don't think that's the case, not for me at least, because I do remember what a big deal it was when Goldeneye came out, and I was considered to be too young to see it in theaters. Our parents regarded it. I think they were right. It was inappropriate for us at the age we were when it came out. Nonetheless, I remember it being a big deal when James Bond returned to the screen. They were advertising for it like crazy. I remember them making a big deal about his jump off the dam at the beginning, which I think was well deserved. Like they put a lot of thought and effort into this movie, and it really shows.
You're 3 years older than I am.
Yeah, so for me, this was firmly in my consciousness at the time. And but they really did a good job with it. Like the effort they put into bringing James Bond back, it was done in a very non-haphazard way. And if you compare it to when James Bond was brought back for the next go-round in Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, I think this is an infinitely better go, just in every respect, than the thoughtful approach that they took. Then they thought that Pierce Brosnan had become too Roger Moore and too soft and silly at the end, so with Casino Royale they went the other way.
He wasn't writing the scripts.
Yeah, but they went super hard the other way in Casino Royale without understanding any of the essential nature of James Bond, and they completely messed it up. Whereas in Goldeneye, they did a really good job with developing an original idea, original IP, new story and everything. They really captured the essence of James Bond, and they produced a movie that's good enough on its own that it's rewatchable many, many times. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the character of Boris, the computer programmer who used to quote relentlessly. I mean, he's funny. The way they deal with everything is funny. I mean, they didn't phone in a single part of this movie. That's why it's so good.
And all of the sets are fantastic, like the underground mainframe room set where they have the Goldeneye launch at the end, where Boris is doing his stuff, and the fight through the antenna cradle, one of the greatest. I mean, fighting on-screen fighting has been taken to a new level in the last few years. Sort of really violent, concussive fist fights,
maybe too much, even one might say.
Yeah, but the fight between 006 and 007 on the cradle when they're just beating each other. Trying to get the upper hand, very evenly matched. It's fantastic.
James, I was always better.
Yeah, the dialogue is so good.
The dialogue is excellent.
The Freud, James.
I was going to say, so there's so many, you can't win, so many great lines. If you want to talk about a movie that we've quoted a lot, the dialogue is fantastic. We should know who the writers are, because this is a great screenplay. One of the great. Who are the writers? Let me look it up right
Well,
now.
I'm trying to think of some of my favorite lines in the movie. Like, do all the vodka martinis silence the screams of all the men you've killed? And do you find comfort in the arms of all those willing women, or forgiveness for all the ones you failed to protect? Which are just, boom, killer lines.
Jeffrey Kane and Bruce Firestein.
Bruce Firestein did a draft of Tomorrow Never Dies, too, I remember.
Anyways, it's a fantastic script. Not just the ideas, but the way they're delivered. So many characters have so many good lines. It's, but you were going to say it, the Q scene.
The Q scene, yes. One of my favorite Q scenes in the entire franchise, where a now quite elderly Desmond Llewellyn is meeting the new young James Bond. And instantly Desmond Llewellyn is so good. He has rapport with everyone, but it's a perfect scene. He comes in with his leg in a cast, which turns out to be a rocket launcher. And that just sets the tone for the very amusing scene. It's not too silly. It's not over the top the way one or two Q scenes are. But, the exploding pen, the piton shooting belt.
He has really useful gadgets they're not utterly ridiculous, but just like great Q gadgets should be, they come in handy at the right time and they're well thought out. We've also referred to this in earlier episodes, but the Judi Dench character, who I really hated, by the way, originally, but as you pointed out,
but that's the point. You're supposed to hate her because she's anti everything that makes James Bond James Bond, and it is she who's changed by the movie. Rather than in a more modern movie, it would be James Bond who realizes he's a creature of the past and has to change.
Yeah, so she has a really good
bureaucracy
character
that
arc.
injustice to him. Yeah,
she comes in as a bean counting bureaucrat, and then finally understands the role of James Bond, even in the modern world. And this is a theme that they kind of drop. They certainly lose their way for a while in the late Pierce Brosnan movies, and then especially in the early Daniel Craig movies. But it comes back full force in Skyfall, which is what makes it such a satisfying bookend. And if you have enough time one afternoon to watch a pair of James Bond films, watch Goldeneye and then Skyfall, as they're sort of the perfect beginning and end.
The relationship between the fact that M has reformed, that it's Judi Dench's M has reformed, becomes clear not in Goldeneye but in Tomorrow Never Dies. And then the personal relationship between James and M is really solidified in The World Is Not Enough, when he rescues her after she's gone to help the girl who turns out to be the bad guy.
Which I never liked as much, though.
If you really want the Judi Dench arc, what you should do is watch Goldeneye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and then skip to Skyfall.
I would skip The World Is Not Enough, and that probably...
The World Is Not Enough is a great movie, and I stand by that.
It's not nearly as good as you think it is. We did discuss it. It's number 12 on our amalgamated list. I think it should be lower, but it's a good movie.
I think you just hate boat chases.
No, I hate the ridiculous Welcome to My Nuclear Family situation, but it does have some good...
That almost kills the movie.
It definitely has some redeeming qualities. A lot of redeeming qualities. It's a very good movie. It's one that I would certainly rewatch, but not near as often as I would rewatch Goldeneye. I could rewatch Goldeneye once or twice a year, perhaps I will for the rest of my life.
I agree completely.
It's just that good.
And I'm kind of surprised Goldeneye didn't make the top 5, but in a way,
well, that's
it makes
because
sense.
there's so many good films. I mean, of the top 5, and we're going to wrap this up and get to the top 5 in the next episode. The top 5 contains 4 Sean Connery movies and 1 non-Sean Connery movie, and it's the non-Sean Connery movie I think that's the interesting choice because people won't necessarily expect to see it there. We're not going to mention it. We're just going to discuss it next time because it really deserves its own complete discussion. But that gets us through the first half of the top 10, numbers 10 through 6. Finishing with Goldeneye, which is such a great film that, I mean, we're now in the category of James Bond films where they really are great, great movies, and you can rewatch them any number of times and have fun each time. So, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one where we wrap up with the last 5, the 5 greatest James Bond films of all time. So, thanks for listening.
Bye.